Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Soo Kim. North Korean ambassador to the United Nations called for the dismantlement of the United Nations command on the Korean peninsula. And China and Russia are calling on the United Nations Security Council to lift economic sanctions on North Korea, to which the U.S. responded by reaffirming it is committed to implementing UN Security Council sanctions. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining me is Soo Kim, policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and adjunct instructor at American University. Ms. Kim served as an analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency and also worked at the Department of Homeland Security. Scott Snyder is also with me today. Mr. Snyder is Senior Fellow for Korea Studies and Director of U.S.-Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of South Korean foreign policy. Welcome to the show. Good to have you both.
Thank you, Youngyo.
Thank you.
I'll start with what North Korean Ambassador Kim Sung said at the UN. He said that immediate measures should be taken to dismantle the United Nations command in South Korea. Ms. Kim, isn't this the repetition of what North Korea has been saying for long?
Yes, this is a consistent North Korean approach or position to the matter. North Korea is not going to be opposed to the idea of an end-of-war declaration because of the potential ramifications that might help the Kim regime inch more towards some of its longer-term objectives, I would say. And even though this is not anything new, the fact that it's being raised now, when we have tensions brimming between the two countries, and Pyongyang is actually getting back on the track for provocations, which really the facts on the ground actually support not peace, but something otherwise. And we should be paying close attention to North Korea doing this. But I think not only is it North Korea's behavior that's problematic, but it's also South Korea's own movements. The Moon administration seems to be, I would say, pressing the gas pedal a little bit more strongly because of the pressing timeline. So we're seeing less of a rationale for an end-of-war declaration and more of a motivation. So we should be concerned about not just the North Korean position, but also the South Korean position.
Mr. Snyder, as Ms. Kim said, should we take a new look at this, especially when South Korea is pursuing an end-of-war declaration and North Korea continues its provocations?
Well, I think we should always look at what North Korea says and try to understand why they're saying it. And I agree with Sue that North Korea's approach on dismantling the armistice has usually been very instrumental as related to other issues or in the context of ramping up of tensions with the United States. But I actually think the more significant content of Ambassador Kim's speech was related to his assertion of North Korea's right to use of space, peaceful use of space. And the reason why I think that is concerning is because it signals the possibility that we may need to be prepared for some kind of satellite launch. And I'm not sure that the international community is ready to respond to such a launch.
With South Korea's continuous pursuit of end-of-war declaration, some watchers in Washington say if and when the end of war is declared, North Korea will likely demand more strongly for the dismantlement of the UNC, United Nations Command, as well as the withdrawal of the U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula. Mr. Snyder, do you see this the same way?
Well, I think the key challenge with the end of war, as Jake Sullivan has hinted at, it's really about order of process and going out and making a declaration and then hoping that the declaration will become so is simply not the right order. Instead, it's necessary for conditions on the ground to become peaceful enough to justify the joint assertion of the end of war. And so that essentially means, it actually means that South Korea is talking to the wrong parties when they come to the U.S., because what we really need to see is additional tension reduction measures on the peninsula between North and South Korea.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Kim, the South Korean government officials say the end of war declaration won't necessarily affect the UN command nor the US troops. Can we take this as what they say?
So the concern here is when the end of war declaration is actually put into place, it's going to weaken the justification for the presence of the UNC, not to mention the presence of the USFK. So when the end of war has been declared, there's peace. So what's the rationale for the presence of US troops on the peninsula? And some may say, I think, that this is a political statement and more symbolic than substance, but we've dealt with the North Koreans before on numerous occasions, and if anything, these political statements turn out to be much more. It's much more weighty. It's more burdensome on the part of the counterparts. So there's a chance that this would give Kim even greater ammunition, I would say, and a document that's going to hold the United States and South Korea to their, to be more accountable to their word. So when Kim doesn't actually have to do anything in return, there's going to be steps required for the United States and South Korea to reduce tensions, and Kim just gets to basically just, again, not do much, not put any effort in, and just reap the benefits of a political statement that's going to have bigger ramifications.
Liu Xiaoming, China's special representative on the Korean Peninsula, has recently said China is willing to play a constructive role on matters including declaring the end of war. Ms. Kim, do you think China is clearly weighing in on the discussion of declaring the end of the Korean War?
So China's, I would say, the spirit of volunteerism in the peace talks and the end of war declaration, I think we should be concerned because it's not driven by the same goals or aspirations of the United States and South Korea. And given, I would say, also the U.S.-China competition, the weighing in on the North Korea issue is going to serve several purposes, I think. And one, of course, is to remind us and to reiterate Beijing's weight and its relevance in regional politics. And we've seen this going on even during the Trump administration. So, and also, number two, since Beijing and Washington's interests over North Korea don't exactly overlap, the involvement, I think, is only going to throw additional wrenches into any progress on the North Korea issue. So it's not really going to be productive, I think, for China to continue to support talks about the peace declaration and the end of war declaration, because I think the direction is going to be opposite of where the United States and broadly speaking, the U.S.-South Korea alliance want to go. And three, this wrench thrown into the North Korea issue is going to create, I think, enough distractions and impose additional obstacles, I would say, to U.S. interests in the broader competition with China. So it's going to serve Beijing's interests, but productively, substantively, when it comes to the establishment of a peace regime in the region, it's probably not going to be that productive.
Mr. Snyder, what do you think China's position is on this issue?
Well, so far the way I see it, China has been pretty reticent to wade into this end of war debate. And I think that China's position on these issues right now is a function of two primary lenses through which China is looking at the peninsula. One is the personal commitment that Xi has made to Kim Jong-un, and the re-strengthening of the strategic aspect of the China-North Korea relationship. And the other is the backdrop of Sino-US rivalry. And so China's silence so far on the end of war suggests to me that actually it's also not a North Korean priority. Right. Because it doesn't appear that Kim Jong-un has really asked Xi Jinping to do anything related to the end of war.
The U.S. seems to have a different position from South Korea on the end of war declaration. Mr. Snyder, is China seeing this as an opportunity to come between the U.S. and South Korea?
Well, so far I see China's position with regard to that issue as more defensive than opportunistic. But I think that on the sanctions issue, we see a more aggressive position by China, really carrying North Korea's water on sanctions relief. And so I just think that's further evidence that the China-North Korea relationship and the Xi-Kim relationship is the lens that is primarily shaping China's approaches right now.
Right. As Mr. Snyder just noted, China, along with Russia, sent a draft resolution to members of the UN Security Council asserting that sanctions on North Korea should be lifted in order to enhance the livelihood of the civilian population. Ms. Kim, these resolutions on North Korea were passed a few years ago unanimously with China and Russia agreeing with this. Has their position changed now?
So I think China and Russia's recent behavior reflects, of course, the true spirit of Beijing and Moscow's intentions over the region. What's noteworthy, I think, about their recent activities is that there's no mention of North Korea's missile activities. It skips over the recent missile tests and chooses really to selectively just highlight Pyongyang's moratorium on the nuclear tests as well as the ICBM tests. We're also seeing consistent sanction violating activities, not just from North Korea, but also from China and Russia. So I think the justification for sanctions relaxation is on shaky ground. Again, China and Russia are complicit in these activities. So for the two countries to press for sanctions relaxation at this point, one, we're seeing tensions rise. One, we're seeing North Korea actually get back on the provocation track. I think is untimely, and I think it also shows the true colors of Beijing and Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Kim, do you think China is now trying harder to exercise its influence in the Korean Peninsula?
So I don't really think China's position overall has actually changed. I think that in light of the atmospherics, again, the ongoing U.S.-China competition and rivalry, the fact that the Moon administration seems to be pressing again on the gas pedal to try to clinch something of a progress, those atmospherics, I think, might be making it more conducive for China to elevate its voice. But I don't really think that this is going to be anything distinctive or anything that's really what's unexpected of China at this point. So again, all of the atmospherics and the timing seem to point towards something that especially South Korea wants to achieve. And I think the most important thing that the United States needs to remember is that, again, the North Korea problem, it cannot be solved with a compressed timeline, and it's not going to be solved when we're seeing from Kim Jong-un absolutely no intention to reduce his own hostile policy towards the United States and the region.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Snyder, did you find anything particularly significant in terms of timing-wise or the contents-wise what China and Russia have been proposing about the sanctions lift?
Well, I think the most significant thing about this resolution, it's the second time it's been raised after coming up at the end of last year. I think that it really reflects a strategy of attrition as related to trying to weaken the sanctions regime in line with North Korean desires. And it is designed, I think, in some ways it's almost a psychological operation against the U.S. effort to uphold sanctions as its main instrument for leverage against North Korea. And it does, I think, lead to a broader stalemate in the international community. The UN Security Council was unable to make a statement on North Korea's recent tests. And so I fear that the UN Security Council is really being taken out of the game as an influence as related to the North Korea issue.
Right. And against this move by China and Russia, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the U.S. remains committed to the sanctions regime. Mr. Snyder, so we can assume the U.S. stance will not change anytime soon about this?
Well, I think that's right. I think the Biden administration position has been very consistent. That sanctions relief is something that may be considered in the context of negotiations, but not as an inducement to come into negotiations. And so really we need to get down to the business of talking about how to structure a package of sanctions relief in exchange for denuclearization steps, which is precisely the conversation that the North Koreans are trying to avoid.
Ms. Kim, do you agree? Does this show the U.S. will not be swayed by the pressure put on by China and Russia?
So President Biden mentioned that he will not be according Kim Jong-un with any international recognition. We also heard from U.S. officials saying that dialogue will be held without any conditions. But I think it's one thing to say that you're going to get to dialogue without conditions. I do believe that there will be conditions put in the dialogue so that there's actually going to be progress on the North Korea front. So I do agree with Mr. Snyder on this aspect. I guess the problematic thing is that we're seeing more dialogue coming, or more talk coming from the South Korea side, where they're throwing a bunch of ideas, including inter-Korean economic cooperation, humanitarian assistance. President Moon talking to the Pope about potentially visiting North Korea. So a lot of ideas thrown into the box. We're seeing, I would think, when you get rid of all the white noise, we're seeing consistency, I would say, from the United States. So it's important, I think, to remember what the ultimate goal is, and also whether or not we're actually wavering from this. We can issue statements that allude to the willingness to dialogue, but I think there are certain conditions that have been placed, and this is why I think we're seeing more frustration on the North Korean front in the form of pressure, in the form of actually no cooperation. So I think we'll have to remember that.
China and Russia were often called out for not complying with the UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea. And this week, the U.S. District Court of D.C. ruled that nearly $1 million from accounts held by Chinese entities must be forfeited, saying the money is linked to North Korean money laundering scheme. Ms. Kim, do you think this will press China to act differently?
I think long run, no. Again, I think the pressures that we were putting on China, Russia, and North Korea, they need to be applied not just in isolation, but through a combination of a broader U.S. strategy towards not just North Korea, but of course the region. And it seems like China will take tactical shifts in its position when it feels like it's going to be beneficial to the broader, I would say, the geopolitical considerations that Beijing is considering. But when it comes to shifting and moving the goalpost of its strategic interests, it's probably not going to happen, again, because of China keeping in mind its broader regional and I would say international aspirations when it comes to dealing with the United States. So the North Korea card, I think, is something that, again, China likes to press when it feels convenient and when it feels like it's going to help with its broader picture. But I don't think this is going to be as significant of a piece in its broader geopolitical puzzle that it's going to want to be persuaded to consider a different approach.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Snyder, your view on this, will this ruling have any impact on China's behavior?
Well, what it reminds me of is the fact that the U.S. Treasury has also fined ZTE in the past, and that is a penalty for a violation of prohibition on exports of sanctions. This is a judicial action that has been taken against a Chinese company and really against a couple of individuals. And so I actually think that the more effective approach toward China may be through the U.S. Treasury than through the judicial ruling through the ministry, through the court.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, South Korea's President Moon Jae-in continuously hopes to engage with North Korea. He has asked Pope Francis to meet with Kim Jong-un, and followed by another overture toward North Korea, suggesting planting trees together to reduce carbon emissions on the Korean Peninsula. Mr. Snyder, his efforts are seemingly unrequited. Does this almost seem like a Hail Mary pass before the end of his term?
Well, for President Moon, I think that what it shows is that he continues to be optimistic despite the low odds of success. It's almost like continuing to buy a lottery ticket. I don't want to fault President Moon for his optimism despite the low odds of success. And as regards the Pope, I think that he would be more effective praying about North Korea than going to North Korea.
Ms. Kim, do you expect there will be any North Korea's response to President Moon Jae-in's efforts?
I don't think so. Again, I think one thing that Kim Jong-un, if he were to entertain the idea of sitting down with the Pope, again, it's going to be a propaganda victory for him. The opportunity to sit down with an internationally esteemed figure who's known for peace and freedom and the end of suffering is a little bit ironic. I'm actually concerned that this might actually help in the normalization of the image of Kim Jong-un from the international community. So he's going to get greater acceptance, and I think that it's very ironic that somebody who represents the entire polar opposite of freedom and human rights gets to sit down with the Pope, who represents the entire opposite. It's just a very odd picture, and I don't think that's going to really move the goalposts on. Never mind the denuclearization issue. But Kim Jong-un's attention to the human rights violations that are going on because of his own actions, I just don't think that's going to be conducive, and I don't think it's going to motivate Kim Jong-un. I don't think it's going to score any points for South Korea or for any other countries that are going to be participating in this.
And now North Korea's foreign ministry is insisting the country's move to strengthen its weapons capabilities is an inevitable choice to prevent a war and protect itself. It also criticized the US and Western countries for applying a double standard, saying they only criticize North Korea and not South Korea on similar moves. And at the moment, it is so hard to expect any progress towards denuclearization talks. Ms. Kim and Mr. Snyder, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.